get us kicked off to the very last virtual meeting for this year. Really excited. Next year, this time next month, we will all be in a room together. Hopefully you'll join us, and we'll be doing this meeting in person. So this is going to be exciting. Sally is recording, so you will be able to watch this, because I think today you're going to get a lot of good information. But welcome everybody to the June Summit County Safety Council meeting. Just like normal, if you could, make sure you're on mute. Make sure you can turn your camera off, unless you really want to turn it on and make faces at us, that's fine. But you can turn your camera off, and we can go through there. Now I will, like I said, we are coming back July 20th in 1 month is when we're going to meet. And we're going to meet in person, and we're starting back the rebate program, and a whole bunch of stuff is going to happen. So one thing to keep in mind is you want to make sure, if you are not already a member with the Summit County Safety Council and you want to use the Summit County Safety Council to get your rebate, you have to make sure that you're enrolled as a member. Now, Sally, on our website, Sally's done a really good job. There's a participation tab, and if you click that, if your company's name is on that participation tab, you're golden. You are enrolled as a member. If it is not, you need to get in touch with Sally, and you need to send in an enrollment form. So that's really the only requirement that you have to do to make sure that you're eligible to get your rebate for the Summit County, or for the Safety Council. Now, they changed the requirements. The requirements are a little bit easier than they were. And really, basically, you have to be enrolled. You have till the end of July. So we'll remind you all again next month when we're in person. But you have to enroll, and you have to attend 10 meetings. Okay, you'll have a lot of options, especially through this council. We will give you many, many options, but you'll have a lot of options. But you have to attend 10 in-person meetings through our council. So you can't go to another council and get some of the meetings for our council. There are no, and I say no semi-annual reports and no CEO requirement. Now, can you bring your CEO? 100%, absolutely you can. And if you want to, that's always going to be a good thing. But CEO requirement is no longer part of the Safety Council for the rebate. Now, everybody's eligible for a 2%. And I know in the past, people are like, well, why can't you bring the 4% back? And there were only a couple hundred people in the state that actually ever got the 4%. Everybody got a 2% participation or a 2% performance, and that's all done away with. It's all participation, so it makes it easier for everyone. So everybody's going to get the rebate if you are enrolled and you attend the 10 meetings. So that's all there is to it. Really, really, really important for Sally. She wants you to basically buy a season pass or prepay for the year. So checks are best. She likes checks best just because we don't get credit card fees then, and we can use the extra money towards training and CPR and stuff like that. I'll show you in just a minute. But checks are great. She sent out the invoice to all the meetings. You can use that to invoice, and if you have any questions, she'll definitely help you through that one. We are going to keep the meetings the same time. The meetings are going to be on the third Wednesday of each month. 11:30 is when we start with lunch, and then 12 is when we'll actually start the meeting. If there's any questions about that, go ahead and put it in, go ahead and put it in the chat. So I see there is a question. So will it be after we start meetings in person to have meetings recorded for participation? So we won't have an option to join virtually, I guess. First is the one option, is we don't have the technology nor the manpower to simulcast a meeting or anything like that. I know of one council that's doing that, but we are not one of those at this time. So the meetings will not be recorded, and to get participation credit, you actually have to go physically to the meeting. That's the only way to do it. And it's kind of like, that's why we didn't have the rebate when we were virtual, because there's no way to track credit, and that's a whole lot of stuff that we are not able to do and verify and proof and all that stuff. So good question. Is August meetings on a Tuesday? Oh, it shouldn't be Tuesday. It should be, the meeting for August is on the 20th. So it was on the 20th. And great question, Pam. Here's the next answer to that. Is it's always the third Wednesday, just like we've always had for years and years. So I had July 20th is when our next meeting is. Sally, if you want to confirm that, that would be good. We have changed venues, though. I'm sure anybody in Summit County has heard that LeBron has bought Tangiers, and we can no longer meet there. So the folks that ran Tangiers are now, this is one of the venue spaces that they're using, and we've been there, and it's absolutely gorgeous. And I think it's going to be a really good fit for us. And if not, then we'll figure something out. I don't know why that dinged really loud, but sorry. So that being said, Our Lady of the Cedars on Cleveland Massillon Road, Copley, Fairlawn area. It's really close to the highway, really close to Fairlawn or Montrose or whatever you want to call it. The one listed is 16th. Oh, Sally, so you might want to check. Somebody said that the one listed is the 16th on the events on the website. So make sure, Sally, I don't know if you're there or if you can unmute, but want to verify, and I'll pull up the date on my calendar as well, and we'll make sure everybody has that. So Our Lady of the Cedars is our new location. Pretty timely. Our first conversation that we're going to have in person is Chad Cunningham. If you guys remember, okay, July 20th and August 17th. July 20th and August 17th. So that's to everybody. That's when those next two meetings are. I don't know why that's sent to the waiting room participants, Sally. That was really odd the way that it looks there to me. But okay, so timely. Everybody's talking about active shooter training. Everybody's talking about the stuff that's been going on. Chad Cunningham, who is one of the best speakers that we've ever had on that topic, one of the better speakers that I've ever dealt with. He is from, I think it's called Navigate 360, which was formerly ALICE, the ALICE Training Institute. And so he's going to talk about being prepared for an active shooter event or an active aggressor event. We've done lots of trainings with him. We thought he'd be a really good draw. If you have other people you want to bring, you can do that. Sally will have an option or a way for you to sign up. If possible, once you sign up and you get your season pass or whatever we call it, then you don't have to register or, RSVP for the month. But if you're coming and you're not, or you're bringing extra people, you have to RSVP that way. So I know Sally's going to send out a lot of communication and make sure that we're all set. But like if 300 people show up at this meeting and we're only registered for 100, you know what's going to happen, right? For one, it's probably going to be a space issue, but two, half of you aren't getting lunch or 2/3 of you aren't getting lunch. So just know that that is something that, we want to make sure you're registering if you're not one of those that are enrolled under the season plan. Sally, anything you want to add to that or anything that I've missed?
No, Carrie, I think you hit all the highlights. Just watch for updated emails from me. We'll be over communicating the fact that we're no longer at Tangier. So just bear with us. Thanks, everyone.
Definitely. Now, one of the other things that we have coming back, since we are going back in person, is that we are doing our first aid CPR, AED, bloodborne pathogens, stop the bleed class. That's a mouthful, right? We have it set for August 23rd. It's going to be 9 to 2, and it is $50 per person. Now, if you have to do training through anybody else, you basically know that at least through the Red Cross or a lot of other organizations, it's over $100. And this is a live in-person class, and they get lunch. So, it's a really, really good deal. I want to say she only had 13 or 14 registered last time she sent it out. If you have folks that need this class, register for it, because if we don't get a lot of folks registered or enough in the class, we're not going to be able to keep having these. I know it's not the $20 that it used to be. Hopefully we'll get back to there, but $50 is still more than half off of what you're going to pay anywhere else, and we're giving them lunch, so it's even more than that. So that is the last thing that I had. From a BWC standpoint, I'm still here. If you need anything on site, if you need anything virtual, if you're looking for programs, if you're mine, hey, let's set it up. You also may be Deb Bailey's or Nick Koya's, and if that's the case, reach out to me and I'll get you to the right people. But we're out there, we're helping folks, on the ground, virtually, depending on what it is, but we're here to help you. You can see we have a lot of webinars. There are going to be webinars going throughout the rest of the summer. We have a lot of classes. You can tell I pulled those off of 2 different screens, right? Excuse me, we have a lot of classes. These are all virtual. The end of September, we actually have our first OSHA General Industry 10-hour in North Canton Service Office. I get to teach that, and that's like the beginning. The end of September is the beginning of some in-person classes again. They're still going to do some virtually, but we're going to have some in-person option as well. We have lots of resources. Oh my gosh, if you don't remember that, I've told you how many times, right? We have lots of resources, YouTube videos, written programs, safety talks, which can be used for training, all kinds of information. There's so much out there, streaming videos, there's so much out there. You never ever have to say that you have to do safety on your own. You 100% have someone here that can help you. So just know that lots of resources. So at this point, I'm going to encourage Dr. Atta to start sharing his screen, and his will take over for mine. And we're going to have him talk today about signs and symptoms and a little bit about prevention of heat stress. And then once he's done, I'm going to jump back on and I'm going to talk about the National Emphasis Program through OSHA and what you have to do. So I will turn it over to you, Dr. Atta. I still think you should have put, the best OCDOC in or something, but he wouldn't do it.
Carrie,
but
stop.
Thank you
Stop,
so much
Carrie.
for joining
Stop.
us.
Stop.
And I'll turn it over to you. So you're good to go.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Can everyone hear me?
Yep, you sound good.
Okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Thankful to be invited to this forum. Thank you guys all for inviting us. It couldn't be more timely to be able to talk on this particular topic, given the weather that we're having out there. So I'm just going to jump right into it. And please bear with me. I am very technologically challenged. And Carrie, just or Sally, my slides will be available if anyone wants them afterwards. Just an FYI. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about heat illnesses. Want to clarify that it's not just one single condition. It's actually a whole range of conditions when we talk about heat illnesses. And the common denominator in all of them is that at some point an individual has difficulty coping with heat, either internally or outside, and that's when you get into the illness part. The scope of these illnesses includes the list that you see there, everything from some swelling or a rash, all the way to heat exhaustion. And the really, really scary part is when it gets to the point where we're talking about heat strokes, which is the most severe of the entire spectrum. Just as some background, there are some figures regarding heat illnesses and deaths in the United States. This is not just in the workplace, this is total, but from 2004 to 2018, these are the current numbers that we have. Over 10,000 people died from heat-related injuries, which averages about 700 or so deaths a year. The timing of this is really important, as we can imagine, from May to September, so during our hot months, wherever we are. And the spread, now this goes from age 15 to age 64. So if we push that out a little bit to age 18, we're still 50% or higher of these deaths were in people who are working age, which is the people that we are extremely concerned about. So pretty significant a number of people are not just experiencing heat illnesses, but are actually dying from them. I want to talk real quickly about what our body normally does to try to deal with heat. The first thing is that our ideal body temperature is somewhere in the range of 98 degrees Fahrenheit, plus or minus 2 degrees. This gives our body the best environment for all our body's organs and body processes to function as ideally as possible. And so our body tries to maintain temperatures right around 98 or so. What we tend to have is within our skin, within our muscles, our spinal cord, we have these little sensors which collect data on temperature all over our body and then send these signals to our brain. So heat regulation in our body is actually controlled really by our neurological system, primarily by our brain and specifically by the hypothalamus in our brain. So our brain collects all these readings and then determines whether it needs to do something, send messages out to other parts of our body to help regulate the internal temperature of our bodies. When it comes to heat, we have all these responses that our body does. Number one is it helps to activate sweat glands. It opens up blood vessels in different areas of our body, specifically in our skin, because the more blood that comes to the surface of our skin, our blood contains a lot of heat, and that heat is able to evaporate easily through our skin. The hairs on our body are important. When we're cold, the hairs on our body stands up and helps to insulate our body. And when we're warm, the hairs flatten and help heat to evaporate much more quickly. So these are a few of the mechanisms that our body uses. The biggest one, of course, is sweat. We have, and this varies from individual to individual. So over 1.5 million glands, sweat glands in an individual's body. It can go all the way to 5 million. The primary function of sweat is to help keep our body core temperature around the ideal 98. And so what the glands do is when they're stimulated, they release sweat, which is primarily water, between 98 to 99% of water, and then it has other electrolytes, sodium chloride, potassium citrate, and so on. And these are important when it comes to trying to replace sweat, is that it's primarily water, but not only water. And the big mechanism is that sweat is able to evaporate off our skin. And essentially what that is that the sweat goes from a liquid into a gas, and as it does so, it carries water with it. Now, evaporation, the principle of evaporation is important to clarify, is that it works best when you have the sweat carrying heat away from a moist environment to a dry environment. So on the surface of our bodies, when we have sweat, that is considered to be moist. The outside air is considered to be a little drier, and that helps with evaporation. And we're going to come back to this in a little bit when we talk about humidity as well. And then the last principle with regard to sweat is acclimatization. This is where our body gets used to outside temperatures and learns how to sweat quickly and responsibly, so that if we are exposed to high temperatures, then we will sweat more. If we are not exposed to high temperatures, we'll sweat less. And so this process of our bodies getting used to reacting to the environment is something that takes time. It can occur anywhere from a few days to weeks, and as I said, helps our sweating ability and the volume. And for example, there are people who have been measured to be able to sweat up to 1 liter an hour, but in high heat conditions, if you're acclimatized, then you can double or triple that volume. So this principle is also really, really helpful in how we use sweat to decrease body temperature. Let's talk a little bit about the illnesses themselves. Heat illnesses can occur in certain situations, which is where part of our talk is going to focus on. For example, one of the first things, of course, is hot environments. And it's important to realize that we're not just talking about just the recorded temperature. So, for example, it's 95 degrees, so we assume that it's going to be hot. But it's also prolonged exposure that can be dangerous. So one of the analogies I use is when for those of us who bake or cook, is that sometimes you can burn something by putting it on very high heat for a short period, but you can also burn something by putting it on slightly lower heat for a longer period. So even when the recorded temperature is not as high, prolonged exposure can also be dangerous. We talked about acclimatization. This has practical correlations. For example, our ability to get acclimatized and get used to responding to different temperatures really protects us. And so when we are first exposed to hot temperatures, like in the first part of summer, or in places where you're not used to very high temperatures, and then suddenly you get a heat wave. In 2019, this happened in Portland, Oregon, and caused a lot of deaths because they're just not used to very, very high temperatures. We typically talk about weekend warriors, people who work in office environments, Monday through Friday, and then Saturday you just get out there and you mow your yard and you want to do some other work outside, and your body is not used to producing enough sweat to deal with the heat, and so that can be dangerous as well. Different medicines, the biggest category are diuretics, which cause us to be dehydrated and therefore reduce the volume of fluid in our body, which we can use to produce sweat. But a lot of cardiac medicines sometimes affect our ability to respond to heat. In addition to that, a lot of medical conditions, particularly medical conditions where we have any issue which is associated with weak hearts. So if you have some kind of heart disease, then the risk of heat illness is slightly higher. Any other liquids that can cause dehydration, so I put coffee and alcohol. We are a nation which is progressively increasing in the amount of coffee we drink. Some of us cannot function without our first 1 or 2 cups of coffee. It is a very strong diuretic, and again, just like alcohol, can cause us to lose enough fluids that we're not able to produce enough sweat. And then I talked about evaporation. When we have external humidity, the research has shown that 75 degrees is the marker. When the humidity is so high that it causes a lot of moisture in the air, then the sweat on our body is not going from a moist situation on our skin to a dry situation in the external air. The sweat on our body is in a moist place, and then the outside air is also very moist. And so then evaporation is significantly decreased. And so very high humidities can cause a susceptibility to heat illnesses. And this is one of the reasons why, again, we don't just measure the recorded temperature. And so some recommendations are to either measure the heat index or the wet bulb temperature. The heat index will measure both temperature and humidity. Wet bulb temperatures will measure the temperature, the humidity, the wind speed, which ends up affecting our humidity, the angle of the sun, and any cloud cover. And these end up being much better indicators than just what temperature it is or the high temperature for the day. And then there is the way we react. There are certain cases, of course, where people are already incapacitated for different reasons, for personal medical reasons, and so do not know to react quickly enough to follow instructions, get out of hot environments, and seek treatment. But there's also the macho culture of, I can tough it out, I can do this. We see this a lot in athletes. But we also see it in some working people who get out there on a road construction crew and say, this is what I've been doing for years, and they tell the newbie to just get out there and tough it out and not seek treatment. So our awareness of how to deal with this can also be a factor in being susceptible to heat illnesses. What are the general principles that affect our body's ability to deal with heat? The first one is, as I said, we have these body mechanisms. The primary one is sweat that deal with heat environments. And if these mechanisms are impaired for some reason, for example, if you're dehydrated already and therefore cannot produce enough sweat, then your ability to deal with heat is significantly reduced. If you have very severe external conditions, so if you are persistently in hot environments, if you work in an area where there's a kiln or a furnace, plus it's extremely hot, plus there's no real good ventilation, then even though your body is trying to do what it can to sweat and to do other things to deal with the heat, the external conditions just overwhelm your body's control mechanisms. When that happens, and we have an inability to regulate our body temperature a couple of things happen. We try to sweat as best we can, and we end up losing a lot of water and a lot of salt. This eventually progresses to us having issues with dehydration. And remember, even though it's only about 1 to 2% of our sweat that contains electrolytes, our body's volume of electrolytes is already small. It's good enough for our body, but it's still relatively small. And so whatever we lose through sweat, it can be significant and can cause significant issues later on. If the exposure continues, and if our body is unable to cope with it, then what starts to happen is that ideal temperature of 98 degrees Fahrenheit gradually starts to rise. And remember, that is ideal for our body processes, our enzymes, our organs to function. And so once the temperature starts to rise, we have a problem because then all of these things are not able to function as well. In addition to that, our body actually releases certain chemical messengers when the internal temperature starts to rise. And unfortunately, this leads to this terrible cycle where our body is heated up so much that we're starting to release these chemical messengers, which unfortunately start to attack cells in different organs. And so this is where we start to get organs starting to shut down. And the scary thing about this is that there comes a particular time that this process is not reversible. And hence, this is where you can be exposed to heat for so long that when you are taken to a medical institution, to an ICU, to an emergency room, they're doing all they can, and it is difficult to help resuscitate the person or bring the person back. And this leads to a situation where we have this scope of mortality from heat-related illnesses. The range is all the way from 10% to 80%, depending on which stage in this process you're at. So obviously, the earlier you're able to seek some form of treatment, get out the heat, and so on, the more likely you are to have less mortality. And also, the more severe your condition is, unfortunately, you could easily fall into the 80% mortality, where in spite of everything, you're in a position where you're already going through multiple organ failure. And at that point, in spite of all the treatment that we can give, it gets difficult to be able to help that person. I already talked about the fact that there are multiple conditions in the heat illness category, but there are three main ones that we generally focus on. First one is the heat cramps category. These are usually when someone's been working in very hot or humid weather. And again, I want to emphasize that sometimes you don't have to be working in 100-degree weather. Sometimes it could be 85 degrees with humidity that could cause this. But what happens is you lose water because you're sweating very heavily, and you also lose salt. Sodium chloride is one of the components which helps with our muscle activity. And when you have low salt levels in your body, muscles automatically start to go into these sudden involuntary spasms, which can be extremely, extremely painful and can incapacitate someone to the point that it's difficult to actually do normal muscle movements because your muscles are cramping up or spasming. We see this occasionally in sports. For those of you that watch football, come third quarter or fourth quarter, the athlete has been out there all day in the hot sun, and suddenly they run a route and then they fall to the ground and grab their thigh or their calf because it's cramped up and spasming. The one thing to notice about this is that this is a situation where good rehydration and cooling will quickly reverse this condition. The other thing to notice about this is that the neurological status of the person is very, very conscious and aware, but just suffering a lot of muscle cramps. Second condition is heat exhaustion, and this is kind of a step above heat cramps. This is where you're actually very exhausted, so there's a feeling of fatigue and weakness. Again, this is associated with profuse sweating after physical activity, and you can have lightheadedness, you can have nausea. You're generally very, very, very weak after working in a very hot environment. There's occasionally very rapid breathing. And again, in this situation, the individual is also still conscious, alert, but there's definitely fatigue and weakness. The third and the most significant is heat stroke. In this case, the biggest factor in this is that there's neurologic dysfunction. There's an altered mental state. And so you can have all the above symptoms, but in addition to this, there's going to be some degree of confusion. Some people have had hallucinations. Some people have had seizures when you get to this stage. It's generally defined as a body temperature over 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit. And it's associated with an inability to have proper cognition. And so the person, in this case, sometimes is unable to tell you where they're at, what they're doing. This is a situation where you're asking them how much water they drank, how they're feeling, and sometimes they're not able to tell you. And then there are actually some of these particular cases in heat stroke where the person actually stops sweating. They're so dehydrated that their sweat glands cannot produce any more sweat. So that rapidly makes their condition worse because at this point, the body is not even able to try to help to decrease the temperature because they're not able to sweat anymore. So these three categories are probably the most significant that we see specifically in the workplace. Most of us are going to see heat cramps and an occasional heat exhaustion. Heat strokes are going to be extremely rare, but just something to keep in mind is that their mental status is going to be altered. So how do we prevent this? We had a couple great suggestions out there. The first thing for the employer is for us to know our environment. So it is important to try to know what the temperature is in that work area. Ideally, if we could, it's important to monitor not just the temperature, but the humidity level as well. So it's good to have some form of regular measurement at different times of the day, because again, there are factors such as sunlight, there are factors such as wind speed, which may affect how hot or how cold how cool the environment is, and also the level of humidity. So important to know this even before you send your people out there. And please bear in mind, this can be for both indoors and outdoors. I've seen a lot of working areas where there are warehouses with big open garage doors at both ends, which still are extremely, extremely hot and humid, primarily because there's no air movement or primarily because of the machinery that's inside these warehouses. So it could be in any environment. The frequent hydration is key. Frequent hydration is very, very important, and it's always important to try to emphasize a good combination of water and electrolytes. Some people will do just pure water, and the problem with pure water is that as you're sweating and as you're losing your potassium and your sodium, and then you just pour water into your body, the sodium and potassium that is left in your body is getting diluted by the additional water that you're drinking, which to the body seems like you have lower levels of sodium and potassium. And so it is important to try to supplement water with electrolytes. Most people will do a half and half, so a bottle of water, a bottle of Powerade or Gatorade is the most common thing that most people do. Salt, oh, let me just add here that salt tablets, not really recommended. Too concentrated and not in a good proportion with water. Frequent breaks are important, and I think someone mentioned that what they do is they alternate inside work with outside work to give people a break from the hot weather outside. But frequent breaks are very important. For those of you that watch, I love soccer, and these days with soccer games in the summertime, the refs are stopping each half. They usually have 45-minute halves, and the refs will break up each half into maybe 20 minutes or 25 minutes and actually stop the game and have the players go to the side and take a break and drink some water. With the workplace, frequent breaks are very, very important, where you try to enhance fluid intake with hydration, try to bring people in out of the heat and have them cool down a little bit, stand in front of fans, what have you. But this prevents remember I talked about the fact that a prolonged exposure to heat could be dangerous, so this breaks it up a little bit. Someone also talked about an ice vest. Great stuff if you can afford that. If not, these days it is very affordable to have some t-shirts and some shorts or even pants which are moisture wicking, and what they do is that they kind of pull the sweat away from your body and help that sweat to evaporate better. Also, of course, I don't know that we can advocate for linens, but linen is a very breathable material. Some cottons are breathable as well, but the lighter and the more moisture wicking, the better. And then just education to our employees about being vigilant, because this is something where conditions can change very, very quickly. And so educating our employees to understand what heat stress or heat illnesses could be, and watching out for each other, and especially if someone is noticed not to be as cognitive as they should be, and bringing that person in is extremely, extremely important. And this goes with my last bulletin as well, which is just reinforcing that message all the way from management down to employees. Don't be a hero. Don't try to tough it out. Don't push that newbie and try to make them feel, because of peer pressure, try to make them feel like they have to stand out there when they're not acclimatized. Don't try to tough it out. This is a point that I recommend should be hammered in as much as possible. Try to provide the hydration, the breaks, and try to, sometimes encouragement is not enough, and sometimes mandating this, where you have people come in and take, if not a whole drink of water, at least a few sips, I think is really, really important. What kind of things can we do in the field? Obviously, the very first thing to do is, as soon as possible, to try to get that employee out of that environment. Try to get them out of the direct heat into a cooler environment. If they are cognitive enough, try to get them to drink some water and electrolytes. Remember, our stomach happens to be a great place to spread cooling. It's almost in the center of our torso. And so when we place cool fluids into our stomach, that helps to reduce our internal temperature somewhat. So if the person is alert, trying to get them to drink some water and mixing it in with electrolytes, very, very important. Air conditioning is ideal. We may not necessarily have that. If we happen to have fans, that will be very helpful, because fans keep air moving and reduce humidity around that person. So if that person is sweating, they're able to get that sweat to evaporate as quickly as possible, which is very helpful. Covering them with some wet fabric. There are all these things for athletes now that you wrap a wet cloth around your neck. If push comes to shove, you could put a wet sheet on that person while you're still cooling them in the air conditioning of the fans. That generally tries to reduce their temperature as quickly as possible. ice packs to the neck, to the armpits, to the groin. Surprisingly, the research has shown that this is not as effective as covering the person with a wet sheet. However, anything is better than nothing. So if this is what you have, pack it in around the person's neck, around their armpits and their groin if you're allowed, just to try to reduce their internal body temperature. And then if you ever had the opportunity and maybe you're waiting for the squad, the ambulance to come, and you happen to have a lot of ice, covering the person in ice is key. I will say, when it comes to heat stroke, in other words, when you notice that the person has had some of the other symptoms, what maybe spasms, muscle spasms, has had fatigue, nausea, general weakness, they're hot to touch, and then you realize that they're confused, clumsy, they're slurring their speech, we're talking about heat stroke. And at that point, this is an emergency. Better to do more than to do less, because that body temperature starts to rise. And remember, I talked about the fact that sometimes it gets to the point where recovery is not possible. And so if you have any suspicions of a heat stroke, call an ambulance immediately while you're trying to do the other treatments to get that person care as quickly as possible. I think that's all I have. I'm going to open it up for questions right now. Any questions?
I am not seeing any questions. If anyone does have any, it'd be great to put them in the chat. And none, okay, you can send them to me directly, or you can send it to the whole group. Either way is fine. How important is it to wear a hat outside?
Very important, because, but it has to be a hat with a wide brim, and it has to be a hat which has enough of a brim coverage to provide coverage for your face, the back of your neck, as well as your upper chest. Because summertime, so most people are wearing either T-shirts, crew neck T-shirts, or V-neck T-shirts. So those are the susceptible areas, is your face, is the very back of your neck, and then if you're wearing a V-neck T-shirt, the upper part of your chest. So the wider the brim, the more coverage it gives you, and the less heat you get to these areas. Most people recommend the straw hats or any floppy hat that just has a wide brim.
Good, awesome. Okay, another question that I saw in here is, what do you recommend for electrolyte replacement, and what kind of quantity?
Like I said before, I like Gatorade, but any of the aids is fine. So I don't have stock in Gatorade. Any of the Powerade, Gatorade, any of those are fine. Pedialyte is a good one as well. I usually recommend a 1-to-1 ratio. So a bottle of water and then maybe a bottle of Gatorade. A bottle of water, a bottle of Pedialyte, or a cup of water and a cup of Gatorade. I like Gatorade because in addition to the electrolytes, it also has a tiny little bit of sugar in it, which is always helpful to give you just some energy and strength. So in the field, that's what I'd recommend. I know Gatorade makes a powder, and so I've had some companies that will just fill up a large ice chest cooler with ice and water and just pour the powder in and stir it up. And then, just put cups by the little spigot on the cooler, and people can fill it up that way. And what some people have done is they've pre-mixed this to the half and half ratio. So you're drinking slightly diluted Gatorade, which gives you a ton of water and some electrolytes.
Awesome, awesome. Okay. The only other question that I see so far, Bill asked if the BWC has a sample written program. The answer is yes. And actually, I'm going to talk for about 5 minutes on the National Emphasis Program. And then directly following today's meeting, Sally is going to send out a link to this recording. I think Dr. Atta's slides. a written program that I'm providing from the BWC, and then some other training resources. So you're going to get all that in a minute. Did you want to close up with anything, Dr. Atta, before I took over?
Happy to answer any other additional questions. We have some contact people on the screen that you can call as well if you need for us to give you more information on a heat stress or heat prevention program. We have ergonomists, and we also have some of our staff that, if you need to, we could come out and take a look at your sites and give you some recommendations. But otherwise, again, thank you guys for the honor of coming to share with you.
Okay, I see one quick last question, and it deals with how hot is too hot for a hot yoga room?
Oh my goodness. So, not sure, but definitely anything over 105 degrees Fahrenheit, I would be cautious. Again, specifically because if you're someone who is not used to that kind of environment, and you go into that is really, really tough. But yeah.
Okay, no, good answer.
Yeah.
So I will say, Julie from the Cardinal Group, she is our gas card winner. I think it's good it's not in person because we'd all be wrestling over a gas card with gas prices what they are. But Julie, Sally will be in touch with you to figure out how to get that gas card to you. Woohoo, very exciting. And I'm going to share my screen right now. Let me do that real quick. And I want to talk, like I said, it'll just be a minute or two. I want to talk about the OSHA Emphasis Program and what OSHA is planning. So can you guys all see my screen right now? It should be good. Okay. Sally, I can't see you, or somebody let me know. We're good. I'm going to go yell if we're not. Okay.
We're good.
Okay, thank you. All right, so OSHA came out in April with a national emphasis program on heat stress, indoor and outdoor, and they don't have a written regulation for this yet, but they are working on it. But to preempt that, they put this national emphasis program. If you're not familiar what a national emphasis program means, basically, OSHA can't just walk into any site. They have to have cause or a reason to. But when they create local or national emphasis programs, it allows them or gives them a reason to talk to you and your employees about a specific issue. So common in national emphasis programs or local emphasis programs that you may know about, they have one around amputations. And so if you have equipment that could cause amputations, OSHA has the right to come in and talk to you and talk to your employees and look at those pieces of equipment. They also have them, and they have a whole bunch of different ones, but there's one around forklifts and training for forklifts. There's lead, there's, you know, all kinds of different heavy metals, there's silica, there's a whole bunch of emphasis programs. That's kind of where I was going. So OSHA has an emphasis program on heat. And what I really want to just pull out really quickly and show you is within this, and I'll send you the link to the program too. That was one of the other things Sally's going to send you. You can actually read through the emphasis program. It's big and long. But within that program, there's a link of 10 questions that if OSHA shows up on site looking at the heat emphasis program or looking at heat issues, these are the 10 questions that they're supposed to ask. Okay, so, and that's what I'm going through on these next 4 or 5 slides here. The first thing that they're going to ask is, do you have a written program? Right now there's no regulation, but this is what they're going to ask, and they're going to want to know if you kind of, you know, got a handle on things. And one of the indicators is that you have a written program. I will send you a sample of that. Customize it, put your name on it, fill in the parts, put the parts. If you do something different, change it, make it yours. The other thing that they're going to ask is, do you monitor temperature, and how do you do that? Do you monitor work exertion on your work site, and how do you do that? That's, I mean, just part of the program that you should make sure is included. The next part, and these are all the things that Dr. Atta said are really important to make sure that you're using as prevention. They want to know, do you have unlimited cool water that is easily accessible? What does that look like? Do you require additional breaks for hydration? Are you forcing or really strongly encouraging folks to do that? One of the places that I see a lot of folks do, or the places I see them go, is they talk a lot, oh, it jumped too fast, about urine color charts. And I see these, especially in the summertime, in the restrooms of facilities, and I don't know, maybe even in the porta johns, I don't know, whatever you want to do. But, you know, it's just kind of a gauge, a way for folks to gauge their own level of hydration. And and making sure that they understand it. If you guys remember, and I know Rick Mage, I believe, is on this, but he had a thing and it was iced tea and lemonade, and in a training session that he did, definitely more towards the lemonade or the water side that you want to have. One of the next things that they could ask for, or they would ask for, is are there scheduled rest breaks? Is there access to shade or AC or cooling down areas for your employee during these breaks? And this is kind of the stuff when I'm out doing walkthroughs, I'm talking with folks about if it's a foundry or a hot environment or they're working outside. And these are the questions, like I said, that OSHA would ask if they do a question on it, or an inspection on it. The next thing, and Dr. Todd talked about this as well, is acclimatization. Do you have folks that, are just brand new, fresh out of the gate? They worked at McDonald's before they came to you, and now they're laying brick, and now all of a sudden they're exposed to this. What does your acclimatization policy look like? What does it look like, as far as time-wise? And this is kind of something that we got to keep track of for ourselves too, because, it's really hot. If you're going to go do some outside activity, you got to make sure that your body's used to it. And it's the same for workers as well. The other thing, and I thought this was interesting that OSHA had on there, is do you have a buddy system? So do you have a buddy system? And part of that's got to be everybody's trained a little bit, right? So a lot of times if I'm having symptoms or signs of a heat illness, I may not recognize it, but somebody else is going to recognize it in me. So do you have a buddy system in hot days, in place in hot days? And are those folks, and it kind of goes along with the next one, are they trained? The bottom one here is, do you have training? Do you train them on the signs, the symptoms, the preventions, first aid, how to contact emergency personnel, and just the importance of hydration? And that's really what OSHA wants you to have in your training. The other part, and right above that, it talks about other administrative controls. Somebody had mentioned in the chat that you guys had talked about on one of the breakout rooms, doing earlier starts so it's cooler and they can finish the day before it gets too hot. Doing job rotation if some folks are in the shade and some aren't, or in cooler environments and they aren't, and they kind of all share the load that way. Limiting overall, a hard number. Here's how long you can be exposed until you're acclimated, that sort of thing. So those are all administrative controls that OSHA could look for. So like I said, I wasn't going to spend a whole lot of time, but these are the 10 specific questions directly out of that National Emphasis Program that OSHA has set up for you to make sure that you're doing the right things related to heat stress and prevention. If there's any questions, let me know. It's weird when I share my screen, I can't necessarily see anything. So if there's questions, maybe Sally, let me know if there's any questions, because I can't even get to the right screen to do it. So Sally, do you see any questions? Crickets.
Yeah. Andy asked if they were cited during these inspections.
You can be, absolutely. So right now, the question, can you be cited? OSHA doesn't have a regulation for heat stress, but we know they always have the general duty clause. So if you're not providing a workplace that is safe from recognized hazards, OSHA can cite you. And so, yes, they can. They're not out there just doing it out of the niceness of their heart. They want to make sure that you're following the rules, and they want you to do it preemptively. So yeah, great question. But yeah, I haven't seen them cite anybody on this yet because it's just kicked in, but I won't be surprised if they do start. So Rick, I don't know, or if anybody else, BWC's on there, if you've heard of anybody getting cited for this yet, go ahead and chime in, but I don't know of anybody yet, but they can. Any other questions, Sally?
No, I don't see any other questions. Peggy had a question on their facility, which Carrie, I think you can handle that with her.
Yeah.
Later. Yeah.
Yep. Well, I'll reach out to you, Peggy. I'll put that on my list and give you a call or send you some emails, some ideas. So, and I think the question too is a lot of you folks out there are already doing a lot of this. I think it comes down to, especially on high hazard days, like today, like yesterday, like tomorrow, full court press, emphasis talking about it. But, I think the other part that we don't necessarily recognize is this can come on really really quickly. And so, you know, OSHA's saying 81 degrees is where we start having some like, oh, this could be an issue. And a lot of times we don't think about it like that. We think, oh, it's not till it's 105, it's not till it's 95, that sort of thing. So, you know, starting that a little bit earlier, recognizing when that is, doing a little more full court press, whether it's training, whether it's, you know, handing out, a lot of folks have electrolyte like popsicles, or they do Gatorade, they do water, they have coolers, they're, you know, walking around doing all that kind of stuff. So, you know, definitely on the high heat days. I know locally we have an employer, and I think it was 2 years ago or last year, that had a fatality. They had a worker up in an attic doing some work that passed away, and they believe it was due to heat. And so, you know, make sure your folks are trained and acclimated and ready to go and hydrated, and, you know, you're doing all of this stuff. So good points. All right. So Sally, do you see any questions? If there's no questions, you know, just to follow up, I will send to Sally. Sally will send out probably later today, if not early tomorrow, a link to this presentation, a written program that I'm given, a link to the National Emphasis Program in case you want to read the whole document, some training resources, possibly Dr. Atta's slides, and anything else that we can think of for this whole thing. And, you know, I really encourage you, just get out on the floor and talk to your folks today. But if you're the one that's not used to it, make sure that you're watching yourself as well and that you're staying hydrated. And we certainly don't want the safety people to go down either. So with that, the last thing I will say, oh, it went too far. Next month, July 20th at 11:30, we're going to start serving lunch, and we're going to do networking, and Chad is going to be there. We're going to talk about active shooter back and live and in person. Remember, it's at Our Lady of the Cedars. Don't go to Tangiers because none of us will be there. So go to Our Lady of the Cedars in Copley, Fairlawn. And if you have any questions, reach out to myself, reach out to Sally. I'm sure you'll get a lot of communication between now and then. So thank you guys so much. Stay cool today. Try to get everybody else to stay cool, and we'll get through this. And I so can't wait to see you all next month.
Thank you, Dr. Atta.
You're welcome.
Okay,
Carrie,
I have a good
will
question on here, and it
Go ahead.
looks like Dr. Atta already jumped off, but is it possible to over electrolyte? And I would say, Dave, if you're still on here, the answer would be yes, because that's why he said no more than a 1-to-1. So I think you could very easily have too much electrolyte, and you want to, water is really is best.
This is Dr. Atta. Can you hear me?
Oh, you're still here. Yeah.
Yes. Yes, that was a perfect, go get your medical degree, Carrie. Yes, you can, it's possible to get too much electrolytes because if you do that, then what you're taking in becomes so concentrated that it's not replenishing enough. It becomes almost like a very thicker fluid in your stomach and actually drags water from your cells into your stomach. So and that's the reason why I talked about the proportion of water and sweat being about 98%. And so when you're trying to replace stuff, which is what we would consider dilute. It would have some electrolytes, but it would be relatively dilute. So for example, just drinking a lot of Gatorade, especially if it's, again, if you're mixing in the powder and you mix it in thicker than the instructions, it could actually be very harmful.
Awesome. Great answer. And I will make sure that Dave knows the answer to that in case he didn't catch the whole thing. Thank you so much, Dr. Atta. That was wonderful.
All right. Take care.
Have a good day.
Bye.